Hey guys, this is Lyra. I'm going to start analyzing, I guess, as many of the replays as I can get through from the recent WCS Global Finals. I'm starting with this game because it uses a build that I find very interesting and that I've used myself. And I will point out the intricacies of the build and the ways that I have adapted it for my own personal uses, should you find that interesting. So this is game one of this series between Time and Serral. And so I'm not going to be casting the replay. I'm not going to go through it in real time. I'm just going to point out, things that are normal, things that are different. And I'll be pausing and rewinding and stuff, etc. So the opening here is just Reaper expand with barracks first. Pretty standard. I will say what's slightly not standard, this scout timing, a barrack scout, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it, but it is later than normal. Normally you see a 17 supply SCV scout. But Serral is definitely not known for mixing things up with his openings. So all this SCV is doing is confirming that it's hatched first. The reason why it's useful on this map to try and block this particular expansion is because Zerg has this one that they can easily take also, which means it's possible that they're less likely to fight over getting this spot. The way if this was the only option, they would probably fight to get it, and the SCV, if it really wanted to block, might have to use an eBay or something. And so the point of that is, if you can encourage Zerg to take this one, and if you're using a battlecruiser or maybe even Banshee build, it's nice for Zerg to take this from the Terran perspective, because those air units can zip back and forth between both mineral lines from the main and this expansion if it is the third. And it's very hard for queens to, the queens, they either have to be split up perfectly or they have to sack one base, because the queens can't run all the way up in this big U shape over and over. So reactor and factory, all standard. So Serral didn't exactly fight for it. He did delay it, but he didn't delay it even as much as he needed to. He just found a slow queen. Didn't even push with speedlings. So notice that depot is starting after the second pair of hellions are started. You can afford it sooner, but he's admitting that. And so what's interesting about this build is he's going right into a liberator. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is not standard, because usually there's only so much a liberator can accomplish. You park it up here, put the liberation zone here, force some lost mining time, because Zergs at this level are good enough that they're going to pull immediately. You're not expecting to get a kill. A queen or a spore are going to move over here and drive it back, and then the liberator basically can't get much done for a while after. It's not as dynamic as a Banshee, which can, sit here and pick off drones as they move back and forth, being rallied to different expansions, or it can come over here and try and mess with creep tumors, or it can fly in from here, see if there's vulnerable drones, or even fly up here, go after those, or just come in this way the third, or just come in the front with the hellions and fight zerglings and queens and stuff, etc. So the Banshee is much more dynamic, so that's why you normally see it. Or the battlecruiser, which does the same thing, but takes longer to build, is more expensive, but it can actually fight, whereas the Banshee is only looking for free kills. So the liberator is interesting, and this is part of the build. Note, he's getting this third gas right after the liberator started, and that's very abnormal. Typically, any of these reactor-hellion starport builds go into a third command center usually after 6 hellions, and then they'll smack down both their nat gas from there. Notice the tech lab on the barracks, and here's where the build starts to get a little crazy. I suppose it starts with third gas, but this is what cements it. So this tech lab timing, you'll see, moderately often from builds that are doing what I described earlier, just a 6 Hellion CC, and you'll see this come down to start stim immediately. Note that it's not starting stim immediately. The fusion core is going down first, and the fusion core going down is why he needs the third gas, and you'll see why in a little bit. So notice these units are being pretty conservative, with the queens masked out here, and I'm sure he's been poking to know that they're there. They can't really get much done in terms of sniping creep tumors. There's no drones here to go after, not much creep spread either. I think it's a little silly to have the units here instead of here, just because they can't see. I mean, it's Serral, he's probably going to play for a macro game, but technically, instead of making all these drones, he could have just massed Zerglings and send them across the map. Now, Time is respecting that possibility by keeping units in his net. Notice that he has not sent these Hellions across the map immediately to join these, so that, if any Zerglings get by these units, he's ready for them. Often, if you're going to do that, you usually leave the Hellions here, so that when you see the Zerglings show up, you don't have to retreat the Hellions to the ramp, which risks them getting caught and surrounded if you're not fast enough. And instead what you do is, when you see Zerglings at this point, you pull the SCVs to the ramp, and they physically block the Zerglings from getting to the Hellions. And they don't attack, so the Zerglings won't automatically attack them, but then the Hellions can attack safely. So Time's not doing that, but again, I don't think Time is... He's respecting the possibility, but he doesn't expect it as a possibility, because it's Serral. Serral just... he plays for the late game always, because he's good at it. And so I told you before that normally you see a third CC after these two Hellions, the third pair. In this build, that's not going to be the case, which was made obvious just by the third. So, in this game, Time gets the tech lab kind of late for the barracks. It's not its own tech lab, it's for the starport. It's, I guess, fine to do that, since he doesn't need it, because he's just making the liberator. But I think it's a mistake, because it projects to the Zerg that you're not making a Banshee. And then, I mean, you definitely need spores to deal with the Banshee. You don't need spores to deal with a liberator. If you just park an Overlord here, one queen's going to deter the liberator potentially, or a couple queens, etc. Because, unlike the Banshee, it can't just maneuver around them. And, again, it's Serral. He's probably not going to be aggressive, but if he is aggressive, having this tech lab ahead of time, and having the starport immediately lifted onto it when the starport itself is done, means that if these units scout early roaches or a Ling Flood or something, maybe the possibility of a Nidus rush, if Ling speed's late or something like that, this could start to make a Banshee immediately instead of the Liberator. But so Time has removed that as an option by getting this tech lab only during the construction of the Liberator. And so addons are going to go down. You see the tech lab here, which is the barracks will actually use this tech lab. The reactor for the factory, it will not use it. It's going to donate it. These add-ons are the reason why you need the third gas to support the BC. Whereas with a normal BC opening, 2 gas alone accumulates the gas you need by the time the fusion core to start the battlecruiser. If you completely skip these add-ons, you could get the battlecruiser probably on 2 gas, although I think it'd be a little late. But ultimately not that big a deal. but you'll see why these add-ons are necessary. So he's going up to 3 racks. This is unusual on 2 base. Normally you see, like I said before, 6 Hellions and then 3rd CC, and then you'll see like E-bays and barracks, assuming it's bio. Well, I won't get into it yet, but note that that's the purpose of these add-ons. The factory donates its first reactor to the 2nd barracks and then builds a 2nd reactor for the 3rd barracks. And so the battlecruiser started, and then he's going to start stim in a second. Again, another reason, another gas expenditure that requires this 3rd gas. So this, and then it's making a 3rd reactor, also not going to be used by the factory itself. And note this eBay, that's coming after the extra 2 barracks. So the first 100 gas after fusioncore is stim. The next 100 gas, well, I guess the next 50 gas is this add-on, then the next 50 gas is that add-on. And in the meantime, the next 100 gas after stim, I guess you say the next 150 gas, so 150, is the +1 infantry attack. And so these units are being fairly conservative. Note that, actually I think I missed it. I'm not going to rewind because I'll just tell you what happened. There wasn't anything to miss. The liberator flew over here. It was in a good position to siege, but time just forgot about the liberator. And so the idea is that when that liberator first shows up, these units do a poke here or here. It really doesn't matter where. I think you choose your target based on what you've already seen. So if you're seeing lots of queens tend to be around here, then maybe you go over here instead, thinking that either the queens are going to be out of place, or if the queens are here, that the zerglings are here. And that even if you can't kill drones because of the presence of lings, you can target the lings, which is still an assault on his total larvae pool, essentially, because any lings that you kill need to be remade. Or if you see the queens here, then maybe that means the lings are here trying to prevent a run by, and again, maybe you can get the Hellions in here, poke here, and go after the zerglings here. And in either case, it's usually not viable to try and actually get drone kills because the Zerg's going to be on top of the defense, you know, with a combination of queens and lings, usually in separate spots. But so you want to coincide a Hellion poke wherever it seems safe with the Liberator going up, just to try and get Zerg to look away from their minimap and away from this area as the Liberator shows up to increase the chances that it can siege. It's important though that this Liberator stays alive. It is not worth it. I mean, unless it kills literally 10 drones, it's not worth it to lose this Liberator because it's going to combo with the battlecruiser later. And these units also really ought to stay alive at this point. Both because the longer they stay alive, the more damage they can get done, either by sniping creep tumors, killing Zerglings later, offensively. If Zerg is very distracted by the battlecruiser later, maybe they can finally get some drone kills as the queens need to get pulled. Or they can be useful defensively if the Zerg tries to be aggressive, you know, anytime soon. So Serral with OV speed did scout the fusioncore, so he knows the battlecruiser is coming. So, like any other battlecruiser opening build, there is a slight window of vulnerability for the Terran where the Zerg can attack, either through a Nidus, he almost has that layer done, or just lings and roaches, or just speedlings maybe with a Bane nest for a bust, or some Ravagers, something. There's a lot of different ways that Zerg can try and take advantage of the fact that there's a long period where the Terran has very little army value besides the Hellions, which are good for Zerglings unless they get surrounded. Now, one thing that's nice about the build is because Zerg has to deal with the Liberator and because the Liberator isn't as big an investment as a battlecruiser, I think Zergs are less likely already to try something like that. And since these barracks are coming up, Terran is going to have unit production sooner than they otherwise would. If you compare this to a normal battlecruiser opening, instead of all these barracks coming up, you have a command center coming up, and then a second gas and 2 E-bays, and double upgrades, etc. And only then do you see a pair of new barracks coming up. And in that scenario, the Terran is unbelievably vulnerable. They just have no units other than the battlecruiser, and Zerg can either hit before the battlecruiser comes out, or they can wait for it to warp to the other side of the map and then attack at a point where Terran is defenseless. Here, though, even though he currently has very few units, he has production coming up, and so he has something to buy time for if Zerg does attack. But it's important to keep these units alive, because if it's roach-based, the Reaper can use the grenade to bounce the roaches back, and since they're slow, unlike speedlings, that actually is a significant delay to them. And if it's anything with Zerglings, the Hellions are very useful. It's a little unusual, I'd say, to have these Hellions still out on the map, but he can safely do so at this point because the wall is complete. Often, you want to be pretty conservative with these Hellions. Like I said, often rallying the next pair, whether it's a second or third pair of Hellions, just to the ramp while the wall is incomplete, to make sure you're safe from run-bys. Now, he's going up to 5 racks. I said at the start that I've been using this build myself, and I've adapted a little bit to my own uses. So, the 3 racks are building up Marines for a 2 base timing. He's going to start his 3rd CC and expand as he moves out, or as he's right before he moves out with his first attack. Now, he goes up to 5 racks before starting the 3rd CC, but these extra racks aren't going to have time to produce units for that push. The push is going to depend on the timing of the first 2 medevacs and a siege tank. So I told you that this factory was making a 3rd reactor that it wasn't going to use for itself. The point is, when the battlecruiser is done, the factory will lift off, take this techlab to start a tank. This starport will land on the reactor and start a pair of medevacs. And the push goes with whatever marine count he has, and stim, and +1 attack, and the medevacs, and the siege tank. And so these 2 barracks will never come into effect for that specific push. So what I have done personally is I've deviated from what Time's doing. I don't get this eBay yet. I don't get these 2 barracks. I get a 3rd command center now, which means the push that I'll point out in a little bit that I just described is unaffected. It's the next wave of aggression after that push that I'm reducing in favor of getting a faster 3rd CC. And then after that 3rd CC, 4th gas and 2 E-bays, which converges on sort of a standard plan for Terran after the 3rd CC goes down. Basically, if you're delaying your expansion from a standard timing, you have to justify it, which means you have to get damage done, or you have to put yourself into a commanding position where you have map control, where you're dominating the flow of the game, or at least where you're in a position where you're more comfortable than your opponent is. Now, I think that just getting an attack out on the map before Zerg is mentally prepared, before they're expecting it, just based on the meta, I think that alone justifies 2 starport units, the Liberator and battlecruiser, before 3rd CC, and also the 3 racks before 3rd CC. For Time, though, going up to 5 racks, he really has to kill or cancel the 4th base of Zerg to justify how late his 3rd is. I'd say in general, 2 base Terran is probably fine to go toe-to-toe with a 3 base Zerg, but certainly not with a 4 base Zerg. And normally it's very difficult to prevent Zerg from getting a 4th, which is why you see Terrans just go into a 3rd. I'm surprised by this. I don't think it's ever worth scanning this early to kill creep tumors, because losing a mule like that is going to remove 225 minerals, which is the number of minerals that a mule would have mined over his lifetime, at a point where Terran, losing that income is now further delaying his 3rd CC, which is delaying a 2nd eBay and armory, combat shields, etc. And the moment these Hellions are driven back, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about to be 6, these 3 queens alone can put down 6 creep tumors. Well, Terran's going to kill, what, 3? 3 creep tumors? For them to all be instantly replenished? I don't think that's worth it at all. I'm very surprised by that move. Creep tumors. Okay, so now the battlecruiser is warping in. So I said I was surprised he scanned, but I wasn't surprised he poked. The Hellion poke is useful both because it distracts Zerg from this move, the BC coming in, and it shows Terran where these queens are. And so he knows that since he saw 3, there can't be more than 4 queens here. Where's this? Okay, 2 here, 3 here. So this is actually a lot of queens. This is more than, a typical Zerg. Most Zergs usually get up to 5, maybe 6 and stop. I know Serral is kind of known for massing queens in general, but as I said, he did scout the fusion core, so he is making extra queens deliberately to prepare for that. But there's only so many queens that Zerg can have at this point, and the Hellions confirmed that a bunch of them are here, which means this is a good spot for the battlecruiser to show up. It's possible that, anticipating the battlecruiser come out, Serral moves, more of these queens into the main in anticipation of the battlecruiser coming here, in which case a Hellion poke, if it saw that the queens weren't here, and it was just, 1 queen and some Zerglings defending, that maybe it would be more appropriate for the battlecruiser to show up here to fight in conjunction with the Hellions. At any rate, he goes here, and this is where the special combo happens between the Liberator and the battlecruiser. So, normally, with a battlecruiser rush, the battlecruiser is going to warp in about where this Liberator is, go after some drones, force a pull to move them this way, and then as the queens get consolidated from wherever they are, the battlecruiser is going to be driven off, and maybe it'll come this way and go after some overlords or Zerglings or something, etc., but it will be driven off, and then the Zerg goes back to mining. In this case, the battlecruiser has warped here, going after the queens directly, and anticipating the retreat path of the drones, while the Liberator sieges up. Now, I said normally the Liberator can't get much done on its own, because, it sieges up, there's a drone pull, and then the queens go after the Liberator. Pretty simple. But the battlecruiser is both distracting the queens from going after the Liberator and threatening them. He just killed one already. That one kill is a dead queen, which is a big deal. And the drones can't really run because they'd be running into the battlecruiser, but they also can't mine because of the Liberator. It's a very strong sandwich. And this isn't, you don't always need this exact positioning. It's relative to Zerg's setup, to the map, and I guess what you've already scouted. And so in this case, the Liberator is just completely denying mining while the battlecruiser fights. But the battlecruiser also can retreat this way to group directly with the Liberator, because, the battlecruiser is okay at killing queens. Especially if it can fight 1, 2, or even just 3 at a time. it wins that situation. But the Liberator is very good at killing queens. I mean, it 3-shots them. So notice the battlecruiser chased the queen into the liberation zone, so it took a shot, and that's how the Liberator was able to take a shot at the queen, because it was herded into the liberation zone. And now 3 queens are dead. Now, even though 3 queens are dead, the battlecruiser does have to retreat because it's taking a lot of damage. Normally this would be the complete end of a battlecruiser poke, warp, rush, whatever you want to call it, because it has to respect the damage of the queens and retreat. But in this case, it can stay and fight longer because it has the support of the Liberator. Although he does retreat there. I don't think he actually needed to. I think he could have retreated the battlecruiser, re-siege this farther to the east, and then keep the battlecruiser around here. But it's not bad to be conservative. He's certainly got a lot of damage done. So, I mean, he only killed 2 drones, but that was, I mean, I'm not going to rewind. I don't think it's that important, but it was about 30 seconds of complete denied mining time. 2 drone kills, 3 queen kills. I mean, Serral was quite prepared for it. I think very often you can get even more done. I'm a little surprised that none of these units tried to run in anywhere. As the queens leave, this becomes vulnerable because it's just Zerglings versus Hellions and a Reaper. And if the Hellions can confirm that the Zerglings are here and not here, I mean, this is completely wide open. Like, if you imagine, there were 4 queens here, and 2 queens here, 1 queen here, something like that. Now, all of the queens, 6, literally all of the queens in the entire map have grouped in this one spot to drive off these 2 units. That means not injected. Not injected. So that's why I'm saying quite a bit of damage has been done, despite only 2 drones literally being killed. Not only did he deny mining time, he's denied more larvae coming up. That hurts Serral's production, which then hurts his ability to make more drones. Although, that's a pretty good drone count by this part of the game. But so, if you imagine when the BC first shows up with the Liberator, and the Zerg goes, oh, I really need to respond to that. If the Hellions aren't ready, they can just watch the queens go up, and then come in, either going up here or here. And that's, I mean, based, where you go would be based on what you scout as far as the movement of the Zerglings and queens. But so, as I said before, once the battlecruiser came out, factory and the starport swapped, making a tank in medevacs. +1 is finishing, stim is finishing. These barracks are getting extra reactors. Note, I think he could have gotten more done with these Hellions, but it does make the push much scarier for these to be alive, because it means that Lings alone pose no threat whatsoever to this push, but Lings alone are what Serral has. I mean, Lings and Queens. And these Marines and the tank, they don't care about the Queens, and the Hellions don't care about the Lings. And so, part of what's going to make this push be effective is the lost mining time and the delay on injects. The other element to it that's going to make it effective, or help it be effective, is the fact that it's off meta. Normally you don't see a push like this until after the 3rd CC. And so it might coincide with the same sort of things. Usually you don't see a 1 tank push, but you might see, all of these Marines with the medevacs just moving out just to deny creep, but like 30 seconds later, and without +1. So now the third CC is started, and he's about to apply a lot of pressure to Zerg, so he feels comfortable making it on location. Serral is aiming to punish that, though. But see, these are the first units that these new barracks, the 4th and 5th, are making. So this push that's moving out on the medevacs and tank, stim, and, well, and about to be +1, these two barracks haven't contributed at all. That's why I think it's probably okay if you want to get the 3rd CC before these two barracks. But, time chose this for a reason. But he is also very confident in his pushing power. Like I said, the more you delay this expansion, the more you have to justify it. Now, I will say that if you just look at this situation and compare it to, a standard meta position, normally Zerg's 4th base is complete. Normally it's starting, probably here, maybe here, I don't know. Normally it's starting at the 6-minute mark, as is a macro hatch. Serral can't afford a macro hatch. Serral can't risk even starting a 4th base until just now. And only now because he's morphing in his first set of banelings. And quite a few. 28. Okay, so he's got some coming from the main, some in the 3rd, and then a small group doing a counterattack, which is something you always have to be prepared for. So, if you just look at the army value, Terran has a pretty scary presence. 1,000 more army value, 1,000 more mineral value, 1,000 more gas value. And so, if he does no more damage from this point, but also doesn't lose that army, at worst, he's completely even, and therefore has already justified the late 3rd, because Zerg has, at best, an equally late 4th. I think it was smart for Serral to clear these rocks. I think this push is a lot scarier if the rocks are still here. Then you put the tank here and move the infantry here. Sieging at the edge of creep is normal. I like this, respecting the fact that there's an extra path because the rocks are gone. The bulk of the force is here, going after the valuable things, valuable targets. But instead of just having this force on the tank, he's able to be a little more aggressive with it, moving it up to here. So, on this map, the distance from, we'll call it the rally here to here where the push is happening is relatively short. On a lot of the maps, that's not going to be the case. If you compare, if this is the rally, but maybe this was the 3rd instead, these units have to take quite a winding path to get here. My point is that if you use this build on a different map, or even on this map, pay attention to when these new medevacs come out, because these units that are walking across the map to reinforce the push, you can load them in the medevacs and boost them over. I'm not sure if that battlecruiser ever got repaired. Yeah, it must have, but I'm not sure if he just muled it here, because it definitely didn't make its way all the way home. But so, note that while this push is going on, the battlecruiser and liberator threat still exists. And, because we can see that the army value is so great for the Terran relative to the Zergs, he really needs all of his queens for the defense to stand a chance. But if he's pulling queens, that means he's not defended against the battlecruiser or liberator. Although in this case, I know the battlecruiser is above the spore, but I'm pretty sure the reason why it's so low already is that I don't think it was fully repaired. I think it just received 1 mule worth of repairing on the map. probably here, and then it warped in. But so, this is a good move. One question to keep in mind for yourself is, after seeing how effective the battlecruiser and liberator are together, you have to wonder, is it at this time more effective to split them, as time has chosen, or to keep them together again? Hard to say, probably scenario dependent. Although, since the Zerg is already working very hard to not die to the push, I think there is a good case to be made for having them totally separate, because it means Zerg has to accurately react in 3 different places, whereas it doesn't really matter how strong the BC and Liberator are together. If Zerg's reaction is, I don't have time for this, I'm just going to pull all drones from mining. But if drones are pulled from 2 locations, maybe not that many die, but there's much more lost mining time, and this battlecruiser is about to die. It's getting hit by a bunch of queens and a spore. But just because it dies doesn't mean Zerg has the APM sufficient to go, oh yeah, I need to put these drones back on mining, because he's dealing with this existential threat. Now, one thing that I don't like about what Time does, that I've focused on when I'm using this build, is getting the armory done. Now, he doesn't exactly need it, because he's just doing, +1 attack, +1 armor one at a time, and getting a second armory, or a second eBay later. Whereas, as I said before, when I've done this build, I have done 3rd CC on 3 racks into 2 eBays, and so the armory timing around now is actually a little early, but it's not bad at all. I mean, it's never bad to have an early armory, and you can see that he can clearly afford the armory. Like, his production is it's not perfect, but it's good. And he still has that surplus money to afford it. So, remember, all of his Hellions had survived from the early game. So if, 6 Hellions are not bad for going after Zerglings, but 6 Hellbats, I think, would be a much more terrifying force. And, of course, they can be healed by the medevacs. So, some of his, like I said, all of his Hellions survived, but some of them survived with damage, even before the push shows up. If just when, by the time they get here, the armory's done, he makes them into Hellbats, any existing damage on them can be removed by the medevacs. So I'm surprised that he doesn't have the armory. I would recommend you have the armory for this push. And so at this point, this is sort of a pretty typical situation at this point of the game. Often, in a normal game, if you do, reactor-hellion Banshee into bio, this is about the time that 1-1 is done, and the tank count is still low, so you're going to have something like 16 Marines and 2 medevacs, so skirmishing with, Lingbane Queen. And so the push itself is over. But it doesn't mean he has to get off the map. Now, the Liberator died here after, I think he got like 2 kills, and then was driven back, was killed by the Spore. Battlecruiser, I don't think it got any drone kills, but it forced the drones off mining before dying. Ideally, you do what Time does and don't lose the Battlecruiser or the Liberator. He warped in the Battlecruiser. I can't imagine that's optimum, but there's something to be said for the surprise factor. But so, when the dust settles, Zerg's on 58 drones, and 3 base, with the 4th only just coming up. Terran's about to be on 3 base. Oh, okay. He sent the SCVs early. I was wondering. So, Terran, I guess, is a little bit behind economically where you would expect him to be in a normal game. But Zerg is extremely behind. Like, normally a Zerg's on minimum 70, probably 80 workers by this point. He's on 60. Like, he's only just saturating 3 base, even as his 4th is coming up. And it's not clear that he can make drones to saturate the 4th. Clearly, he doesn't believe so. He's still making more units. And so, map presence-wise, time has sort of converged on a standard position, but Zerg is not converging on a standard position economically. So by this point in the game, I think it's clear to see that time has proven the validity of the build, and that time is ahead, or at least ahead of where he would have been in a standard game. Yeah, I get the sense, I'm not going to rewind to confirm, but I get the sense that time did miss some production cycles. The standard benchmark is 70 SCVs by 7.5 minutes, and a later third is definitely going to, reduce that number, but not this much. I mean, Serral set up a Ling counter, but it didn't do anything because time wasn't rallying his units across the map, and he was able to defend it. So time's SCV count cannot be explained by either Serral's aggression or by the late third. So that's something that time could have done better. The reason I point this out is he should be able to afford more barracks in this. He should be able to add 2 or 3 more barracks right now. The reason he can't is because this is only just now getting saturated, whereas the moment it completed, it should have been completely saturated. And I've pointed out a couple of times where I think time is doing questionable things with his orbital energy. Wasting a scan here. Pretty sure he dropped a mule here to repair the BC. Just send the BC home. Or hell, send some SCVs across the map. I think any of those options are better than wasting 50 orbital energy. And so, I mean, at a minimum, time is, 450 minerals behind where he could be? If all he did was not waste a mule on repairing and waste a scan on easily replaceable tumors at a point where a push wasn't coming. But then those two things would also make it easier to maintain constant SCV production, and so that and the addition of constant SCV production means that time should have better production capacity than he has already. So I did point out earlier that as the main push is going, that you need to remember that you can, instead of walking these units across the map to reinforce the push, boost them across via medevac. Time is sort of doing that, except he has never reinforced this push. He's only sent them to a different spot. Now that was certainly useful here when he was able to deny the 4th. And it's not clear to me that this force needs to be reinforced by this point. I think it's doing its job. Although the medevacs are pretty low in energy. They could use at least an extra medevac, maybe, if not more units. But I do wonder whether repeatedly sending this multi-pronged aggression to the same spot, whether that was smart. Notice times money starting to get high, because as I said before, he should be able to support 2 or 3 more barracks. Oh, I hate that. I hate that he has his 2 eBays in different spots. I think it's fine for the armory to be over here, but it's way easier to keep track of your upgrade progress if they're in the same spot. I have no idea why he did that. So, +1 armor has just finished for Terran. His armor was a little slow to start, but the 1 eBay approach is definitely getting upgrades slower than normal. Typically, as I said earlier in the game, the 1-1 is finishing at about the 8-minute mark, which is how you end up with the 10-minute 2-2 timing, because the +2/+2 takes about 2 minutes. A little more than 2 minutes to start, so you want it started by 8 minutes or sooner. And so that is made possible by in the normal meta build, where it's some tech opening into 3rd CC, into nat gases and double eBay before barracks. That's how the upgrades line up. In this case, I mean, I suppose the armor, +2 armor, should be about this far in as well, but he was a little slow to get to start it, probably because it's in the wrong spot. But so, I mean, 15 seconds from now, this is going to be, what, half done? So his 2-2 is going to come about a minute later, at least a minute later than is typical. But if you're able to keep the Zerg on their toes to the extent that time is, you can probably, as I've said before, he's definitely justified the 3rd base timing. Can you also justify the late upgrade timing? I think it's safe to say that he is. I mean, Zerg has an enormous supply deficit. I'm actually not sure what normal Zerg upgrade timing is. It's probably safe to assume he's behind, because he's behind on everything, because Time's build is so powerful. It does appear that he could have at least started the hive by now, though. His money is fairly high, and I think part of that, his money being high despite his drone count being low and income being low, I think part of that goes back to the queens constantly being forced to be misplaced, such that they're not able to inject constantly, and so many queens being killed, and then being forced, then the surviving queens being forced to use their energy to spread creep, because it's one of the most important things. You can see how the effect of Time's aggression is adding up. But I do wonder if Time didn't worry so much. Like, canceling this the first time was great, but I wonder if he just consolidated his troops and actually built up a tank count, if he'd be able to end the game here. I know he lost 1 tank here and 1 tank here. I don't think I've seen him lose any other tanks, which means for him to be on this low of a tank count, just 2, means he has not been macroing his factory constantly. And so that makes it hard for him to have any kind of decisive blow, which is probably why he feels compelled to split his forces. Because if by this point he can push with like 5 or more tanks with just this exact same bioforce, he can probably kill this or rotate down here and destroy this and be in a completely winning position. I think he's ahead here, but it's not clear. But, you know, winning and having won are different. And you have to wonder why he wasn't able to close it out from this position. Where is the spire? Oh, there it is. Okay, so if the spire is here, he's been fighting here and scanning. He probably saw it a while ago. I don't think the presence of the spire is what caused his tank count to be low, because he clearly knows there are muta, and I think it's safe to assume that getting the tunneling claws and putting the reactor on the second factory means that he has been aware of muta coming out for a while now, and despite that still chose to make siege tanks. I'm pretty sure the second factor having the reactor and the tunneling claws are a reaction to the muta, not a standard progression of the build inherently. And see, only just now is he getting these extra barracks that I mentioned that he could have supported a minute and a half ago. You can see his money's quite high. And so, losing this part of his army, separate from the main force, has caused the supply gap to vanish. And now, in a single instant, time has gone from being in complete domination of the map to completely defensive. And this is what's finally giving Serral the space to unfuck his economy. Oh yeah, sorry I missed it. What happened was Time had put a siege tank, so the first two mines that came out of this, he burrowed here and then put a new siege tank on top of it and sieged it, and left his bio around here and up here. So the muta jumped on it to try and get a free tank kill and took all of this damage. Unfortunately, Time wasn't able to catch him with the Marines and kill him. That probably would have actually ended the game. I mean, these guys, they heal quickly. So they'll be a threat again pretty soon. And Serral is remaking some of them. So, remember I pointed out the upgrade situation earlier. Normally Terran is aiming to get 2-2 complete by 10 minutes, and from just the difference between the standard and this build, he was already going to be a minute or so later, but even 2 minutes later, the +2 armor isn't done, whereas Zerg is on 2-2. Well, that was a spooky move by Serral. I'm not surprised that it worked on Time. Basically, Time didn't have like spotter marines or a scan or anything. He wasn't watching his flanks because there's no creep here. So the assumption is Zerg's never going to attack you off creep or come at you from an angle that doesn't have creep. But that's exactly what Serral did. And so he had Banelings coming in from two different directions. And so the way that Time was retreating his army towards his tanks this way, sorry, I wish I could draw, from top left to bottom right, was inappropriate because of the Banelings coming this way. He actually needed to just retreat this way. And so he noticed that. That's why he still has Marines left over, but he lost a bunch because he didn't realize what was happening ahead of time. Again, really hard to anticipate that move to have a Marine spotter out, but Marine spotters are a good thing to use. He did the same mine trick. He's got these widow mines under the siege tanks. But again, it's not killing the mutas. I mean, he's doing it with 2 mines at a time. It's clearly an effective trick. I don't know why he doesn't put 3 or 4 there. Do 3 kill a? So 40 times 3? Is widow mine damage reduced by armor? I assume not. So as far as I can tell, the same trick done with 3 widow mines destroys all of these mutalisks. Something to keep in mind. Excuse me. So what I was looking around for is to see what kind of late game preparations Time has, and beyond starting a 4th, the answer is he doesn't have any. Meanwhile, Serral is getting into hive tech. One of Time's strengths is his ability to fight so effectively with his units in multiple occasions at once, and the Muta have really forced him to put all of his units in one spot, which means Serral's pretty safe from Time's specialty. So, I think because of that, sorry, I don't know where this cough came from. Because of that, it was definitely a good move by Serral to get these mutas, and it may look like the most natural move, but I really don't think it was. I think most Zergs, realizing that if they were in the position that Serral was, on the back foot, with a late 4th, which was then denied, so a super late 4th, a lower than desirable drone count, which of course Serral has fixed since then, being in that position, I think a lot of Zergs would feel compelled to rush into hive tech, thinking that because they were behind where they needed to be, that they needed to play catch up to get into that late game tech position. But Serral farther delayed his hive tech to get the mutas out, which is risky because, you know, if these 0-0, I mean, he's +1 now, but if, you know, 0-0 mutas come out and Time just pushes, you know, especially if his 2-2 is on Time, the mutas are a big risk because they might just be wholly insufficient to defend. But in this case, Serral was able to use them effectively to keep Time on Terran's side of the map. And that's let Serral expand everywhere. And so, that gamble by Serral has worked and has completely eroded the advantage that Time had. I mean, at this point, Time's SCV count is slightly low. His 4th is a little late. His main and Nat are starting to mine out with no 5th base in sight. And not very much in the way of late game longevity here by Time. You know, I'm not a fan of sensor towers. I think they're the coward's approach. Real men just split the Marines up as spotters. But when you're dealing with this many muta, you probably want sensor towers. Oh, I remembered that. Or, I should say, I remember that happening. So that was +3 attack the moment before it was completed, being cancelled, as well as +3 armor. So part of this is Time's fault, because he did get those upgrades a little late. Especially the armor was just altogether started late. It wasn't even a product of the build. He really should have, even with his build though, he really should have had 2-2 done by 11 minutes, which means 3-3 is already done. So by getting caught out of position, letting the Muta get in here and the Lings get in here, that blunder allowed 3-3 to be cancelled. But the bigger blunder was not having 3-3 already done, such that it couldn't be cancelled by this move. And so now Time's trying to hit his 3-3 timing to end the game before Hive Tech comes out, but he doesn't have 3-3. And now, since he has let Zerg in his production, this push is all in. It has to win the game or he loses. And that's not really Time's style. Time's expertise, as I said before, is just using his units expertly in multiple locations to just trade extremely favorably. And now he can't do that because he has to make a move. He has to win now, and he doesn't. So that's game one. And you can see the power of the build that Time used there. That really good decisions made by Serral and some mistakes by Time allowed the advantage that build gave him to be eliminated. So I don't remember the builds from this game and the last one. Which isn't to say that they weren't good, but they didn't catch my eye the way the previous game's build did. So same opening so far, Barracks first, Reaper expand. Okay, so he went into a reactor-hellion looking opening, but then started the third CC. Did he make 2 Marines? No. There is a variation where you make 2 Marines and delay the reactor so that you can more easily deny slow overlords. But Serral usually gets OV speed, so sort of a moot point, I guess. Seems like these barracks are early. Yeah, these 2 barracks, or sorry, this second barracks has been started at the expense of the Hellion timing, which means these Hellions really shouldn't cross the map. They should just be playing defensively. I'm a little surprised by that second gas timing. I think it was late. So, the first barracks that made the reactor, after it lifted to let the factory make a pair of Hellions, then it started this tech lab. The second barracks, which he started immediately after the third CC, then went on the reactor. Surprised to see no extra barracks and no e-bays. There's the e-bays. So normally by this point of the game, if Time had just gone Reaper expand into reactor-hellion Banshee, or something like that. He would have 6 Hellions in the Reaper, and the Banshee would be done flying over. The Banshee would arrive around 5.5 minutes or so. Or Liberator, or Viking, whatever you want. And then the third CC would start, and then these gases would start, and then these E-bays would start. So the result is that relative to a normal position, Time has a much faster third CC. It's done instead of being started. His E-bays have been started earlier than normal, so his 1-1 should start earlier than normal. So his 2-2 should be done by like 9 minutes. And, I mean, this timing for stim being done and the medevacs coming out, it's like maybe 30 seconds later than the Beyond build, a normal 2-1-1. So he has a lot of advantages over a lot of standard builds. That's interesting. So the starport made... So the factory hasn't produced anything besides one pair of Hellions. It made a pair of Hellions, lifted, and started a reactor for the starport to go on. The starport made a pair of medevacs and then lifted to make its own new reactor, while the third barracks takes that. So there has never been a point where a barracks has been idle, basically, since the third CC finished. None of these barracks are making their own add-ons. Excuse me. So, remember in my analysis last game, I said that you're usually seeing Zerg taking their 4th and getting a macro hatch at about the same time, at about the 6-minute mark. So, trying to take advantage of the fact that Time has a very fast third CC. Serral's 4th was started at what, like 5:30 or something, so at least 30 seconds early. But he's underestimated Time's build, and that's been forced to cancel. I really hate that Time took this pace. I think this is the worst possible option. I think this is the best, and this is a close second best. This factory production is quite slow, though. Unfortunate. He retreated the wrong way and got himself cornered, which means that he lost the Hellions. It's such a difficult move to anticipate. TY says that you should always have a missile turret along the anticipated path of an Overlord drop, or I should say a bailing drop from a dropping Overlord, once you see Overlord speed. But since just about every Zerg and always Serral get OV speed, no matter what, I think it's hard to remember to react to the fact that Zerg has OV speed, to respect the possibility of the drop. Yeah, I mean, he made this turret, but there's no turrets here, so he's left this base equally vulnerable to a drop, and he didn't make a turret here, and we can see that that's about to be punished. Okay, so I told you when the upgrade should be finishing. But they're not going to because there's no armory. There's the armory. I lied. It's still late, though. Okay, so didn't have a turret ready, but he did have his eyes open. But he's still losing mining time. And so, okay, time lost 5 SCVs, just 5, to the very first bailing drop. Since then, he's taken no other damage, and he took no damage before. Remember I said last game, the benchmark for SCV count is 70 SCVs done by the 7.5 minute mark. That's from a Reaper expand into like a about 5 minute third CC started. Remember I pointed out that with Time's build, his third CC is done at the 5 minute mark instead of started. Like his third orbital's done then. I mean, what lead is that? 71. Sorry, I don't know how long it takes to make an orbital. I don't know, I'll call it 30 seconds. So something like a minute and a half. So he's a minute and a half at least, probably more, at least a minute and a half faster on this third CC, this third orbital. That means his SCV production should be better than normal. But if you add 5 SCVs to this count, which is the number that he physically lost, that's at 68. Which means he did not have enough SCVs by the 7.5 minute mark. So again, like last game, Time is not staying on top of constant SCV production. Which means that when he's forced to pull SCVs, reacting to a drop, when he loses some to a bailing drop, he's taking damage that he's not in a position to withstand. Like it's not negligible damage. Even though it's just 5 SCVs, it hurts a lot since he doesn't have as many SCVs as he should have. So he lost 1 tank out on the field, and he has 3, 2 here, 1 just finishing. I guess that's about... I think that's about right. I was seeing if I needed to criticize his factory production again, but it appears to be mostly fine this game. Which means the most egregious things he's doing are bad SCV production and late upgrades. So, I said, by looking at his initial eBay timing, I expected his +2/+2 to be done now. Instead, they're going to be done at the 10 minute mark. Which on the one hand is fine, because that's when you expect to have it done, but he should have had it sooner than that. So again, he's mistakes made on his own accord, not mistakes that Serral has forced on him, are causing the advantage he should have gotten from the build that he chose, the build that was successfully executed, from being present. Yeah, I mean, Serral just has an unbelievable advantage. Like, in a normal game, Terran should have a 10-minute timing, and he just doesn't. He's just completely losing already. And being in such a bad spot means that he has to focus on this mid-game tech, so he can't prepare for the late game. But because Serral's ahead, he can. I'm not sure if this second factory has produced anything. And I don't mean to, oh, what's the expression? Beat a dead horse. But this is about to get really oppressive really quickly. This night display is very difficult to deal with, especially because it's such a big map, and the mutas are already, the presence of a large number of muta alone is pulling time apart. Adding the niduses to it, makes this a true nightmare for Terran. So by this point, I don't expect any Zerg in the universe or any Terran in the universe to overcome, this kind of play from Zerg, especially when executed this well. But all that having been said, this is made possible by the blunders that time has made. Because if he's in a position to make his 10-minute timing the way the standard is expected to happen, Serral probably isn't in a position to do this. Either he's remaking units that are dying in a push. After 45 seconds of aggression, he's spending money to replace stuff to remax, and literally can't afford it, or because he's dealing with a push, possibly a single doom push, or a large threatening existential push in conjunction with some multi-pronged aggression, drops over here or over here, depending on where he's pushing, that he can't afford the attention to get these niduses down. So it's unfortunate, because time is behind, he can only get more behind. How did he have vision? Must have been a changeling there or something. That one was spooky. I don't know how that started. Now, this looks really oppressive by Zerg, but again, part of this is actually time's fault. Because he's made this his third, and he has so much stuff here, depots and armory, etc., he's made this expansion more valuable to strike, and in some ways more vulnerable, because you're never going to rally here or here. And that's why I think it's so much better to take either this expansion or this expansion as a third, because in either case the rally is either here, it could be here in both cases, but it's probably going to be like here, maybe here, or here, depending on whether this or this is the third. And so, if your rally is in one of the two spots, those units can react, going back and forth, or back and forth, etc., depending between the third and the nat, or the third and the fourth, etc., depending on where Zerg's attacking, what's happening. It's so much easier to do that if one of these is the third, and almost impossible to react that quickly if this is the third. But time chose this as his third, and so he's set himself up for failure. Now, Serral is executing this phenomenally well, and the brilliance is of it, of course, that every time there's a run-by in one spot, or a nidus that gets up and get some banelings and lings out at one spot, it's likely that Zerg can save at least one Zergling. Does he have burrow? He has burrow. So remember when that first nidus came out and some banelings popped out, if just one Zergling or baneling gets burrowed, then that provides vision for another nidus to be remade. And as the mutas come in to deal damage, to take advantage, there, I couldn't see him, it was just a blob of ugly. as the mutas come in to take advantage of wherever the main Terran army isn't, as it reacts to some Nidus inevitably, then the muta themselves provide vision for a Nidus. And so it's like a self-propagating death machine. I hate it. I will say that, in theory, the way you deal with this kind of late-game Nidus play is you just keep some units in reserve. A siege tank will do the job, but it's probably a little expensive. But these Marauders are not actually good. Like, they exist to maybe absorb bailing shots, and I don't think he's scouted. No, he hasn't scouted Ultra's Cavern. Basically, when you see that Zerg is using, these hit-and-run Nidus attacks, borrowing a Zergling, sending in Muta to get another Nidus up, you just want to leave a Marauder at every spot. So, ideally, where Serral has shown, he wants to put a Nidus here. It's the farthest possible spot from the Terran rally within his own base. Okay, cool. If you anticipate a Nidus might come in here, put a Marauder here, or even just in the mineral line so it can react to anything. So the moment you see it on your mini-map, you can jump to that spot, grab the Marauder, stim it, and have it target the Nidus. Where else did he put a Nidus? He put one here. Cool. Put a rally here, or grab one as it comes out. Leave a Marauder here. Maybe put another one here. Or just leave the one Marauder centrally located so it can react quickly to any of them. I mean, honestly, better safe than sorry. Is it annoying to have to leave units behind in reserve? Yeah, but, Zerg usually has to do the same to respect your drops. In this case, Serral isn't, but that's because his units are all bullying time, preventing him from dropping. And ultimately, let's say he has 4 bases. Let's say he needs 4 Marauders in reserve to play whack-a-mole with the Niduses. If you take 4 Marauders out of his combined total army, it's a negligible difference, whereas keeping literally his entire army on defense, that's much worse than 4 Marauders if you can make them work. Now, here, because the run-by, or the, I don't know if you can call it run-by, the Baneling bust here has obliterated the defensive integrity of this base. Yeah, if there was a Marauder here, it would be gone. And I'm shocked that there isn't a Nidus coming up here, but there certainly could have been. But again, part of that is time's fault. Usually, a Terran is going to have a bunker or a tank or a small portion of infantry or his rally at the third base to keep it safe from run-bys. It's such a predictable Zerg strategy because it's effective. And time had a wall, but that's, the first line of defense. You still need a second line of defense, and time wasn't disciplined in maintaining that. But again, I think this is easily the most difficult possible expansion to defend, because it's so far from your rally, so far from your production buildings by ground, by pathing, so far from where your push is as you move out on the map. So see, the Muta come in, set up a Nidus, then fly here. That Nidus is stopped, but now this Nidus is coming in. And as the army reroutes here, the Muta can fly back here. Okay, 3-3's done. But, and so 3-3 has finished at a good time, but it's too little too late. He's already completely losing, completely on the back foot. And so normally 3-3 is an important landmark for the Terran, because the Zerg can't be at 3-3 yet, although he's pretty close. He had such freedom to start his hive, even after going Muta. It's absurd. So, at the point of the game where Terran should have a spike in power, he doesn't. And so, like I said, there's just a whole bunch of factors that have caused this scenario, this nightmare, to be reality. But a lot of it is just a lack of discipline on Time's part. You know, suboptimum macro earlier meant that he couldn't hit any kind of push earlier. Not nailing his upgrades immediately meant that, again, he didn't have the upgrades at the point before he had lost the game. You know, not taking the Muta seriously. I mean, he didn't even get drilling claws. He didn't get any widow mines. He got some Thors. Okay, Thors are nice. They keep your army safe. You know, when the Thor first comes out, it keeps your base safe, and then when you move it out with your army, it keeps your tank safe, right? But as the Muta numbers get higher, you know, basically no number of Thors is enough because you can't split them up the way you need to. So, okay, how do you deal with Mutas? Well, drilling claws and widow mines can work. He elected not to do that. That's fine. But then you need missile turrets, like a lot. Like, not just one, because one missile turret just gets one shot by the Mutaflock. Where are those Muta? Here those bastards are. And then, so, lack of discipline in actually preparing for the Muta. You know, no defenses here. Literally no defenses, just a wall. A depot wall. It's the easiest thing in the universe for a Zerg to bust. Zerg can bust, you know, depot walls as early as 3.5 minutes. You have to have more preparation by this point. You know, once mutas are out, I think sensor towers are important for that. But also, I mean, widow mines, or just a bunker, like anything in addition to what he had would have been a drastic improvement. I don't know if it's greed, if he's just trying to squeeze out every mineral into army. Clearly that strategy hasn't worked. I mean, he was stuck on defense until he decided just that he was done defending. I will say, you know, because 3-3 has finished, he might have a timing where in the minute prior he didn't. But because he's been on the back foot so much, there's so much creep spread. I wouldn't want to push this deep on the creep, but he has to. And it doesn't work. So, not a bad build from Time. A build that gave him an economic advantage, but one that he squandered. I'd say not a flashy build, the way the Game 1 build was, but not every build has to be exciting. It just has to be effective. It is interesting to see that the build Time used in Game 2 was extremely economically greedy compared to his Game 1 build, which was extremely aggressive and, you know, dramatically delayed economic growth. Yeah, because Zergs never anticipate this, right? I'm shocked that Time elected to use this build. On the one hand, it follows that dynamic I just mentioned, where each game Time used a completely different style build. Okay, sure, but why this? Why here? I mean, often you see a 2-Rex like here or something. Or maybe, I mean, I think if you just put it here, it has a chance of succeeding. But every single Zerg, from Diamond and up, sends their first Overlord over here to scout for exactly what Time did. And then he's behind, so his follow-up is, you know, the greediest possible third CC timing. But so now he's, you know, since the proxy 2-Rex failed, he's transposing basically into a less efficient version of last game's build. My problem with that is last game went so horribly. Why did he feel comfortable putting himself into a worse version of the same scenario. So I paused last game at this time and noted that stim was done, that there were 16 Marines and 2 medevacs ready to move out, that the upgrades were, the 2 eBays were done. The upgrades were about to be started. In this game, like I said, he's transposed into a less efficient version of the same build, where stim is not done. Stim is less than half ton. There are not 2 medevacs on the field. The starport isn't even done. Upgrades are not started. eBays aren't even started. So he's just accepted a horrible position from the get-go. Yeah, and then so the factory made the reactor for the starport the way it did last game, which means instead of having a tank about to be done, he's starting the tech lab. I mean, I guess on the one hand, it's unfortunate for Time that the build he chose, which presumably took careful consideration, excuse me, was completely shut down. But I feel like that's a completely predictable result. Then his follow-up to that was a very greedy build, likely designed to take advantage of the fact that Serral is known for macro and going into long games. Now, I guess, again, it's unfortunate that Serral actually chose to react and to kill Time with a roach all-in, basically. But it's not clear to me what the point of this follow-up was at all, since he used a better version of it in the previous game and got completely dominated. So I like that he tried to switch things up from that with the proxy, but when that failed, I would have liked to have seen him remain in a switched up state and go into like maybe a 2-base timing. You know, would it be as strong as a 2-base timing? That was, that was the plan from the get-go? Well, no. But I think there's more chances for that to work, because going greedy against Serral, who's known for his prowess in late game, seems silly, and Time, who is known for his exceptional relentless mid-game aggression, excels in these mid-game spots from these 2-base emphasized builds. So why put himself in a late-game position where he accepts a scenario where he must predict that Serral's stronger? Oh well. It was Time's tournament. Well, I'm going to stop this analysis now because my voice is dying and I don't like coughing. Thanks to anyone who has watched, and I'm probably going to try and upload the VOD so people can look at this later if it's useful analysis. So I'm signing out. Thanks for watching.